The evening started like every other forced family gathering, a table set with more crystal than guests, my mother fluttering around in her pearls, and my father pretending this was all perfectly normal. I'd parked my battered pickup on the street, partly because it leaked oil, partly because I knew Robert hated seeing it in his pristine driveway. The second I stepped through the front door, I could feel it, the quiet hum of judgment, the way everyone's eyes flicked to my clothes like they were bracing for the smell of factory grease. Carter was already there, of course. My younger brother, the golden child, in a blazer he probably couldn't spell the designer name of. He looked up from his phone and gave me the same tight smile he perfected years ago, the one that said, "Isn't it adorable that you showed up?" "Logan," he drawled, leaning back in his chair like a king entertaining a peasant. "How's work?" I bit back a sigh. "It's fine." Robert cleared his throat. "Still at the factory?" "Still at the factory," I echoed, because apparently that was my entire identity. Carter smirked. "Must be steady." Translation: must be dull. Must be beneath him. I took my seat at the far end of the table. Elaine started ladling soup like nothing was wrong, her smile brittle as spun sugar. "So," she chirped, "Carter has big news." Of course he did. Carter set down his spoon with theatrical care. "I'm being considered for a director position. Big promotion." Robert beamed, clapping him on the shoulder like a proud coach. "That's my boy. Moving up." I took a sip of water, wishing it were something stronger. "And you, Logan?" Robert asked, with a pointed calm. "Any developments?" I opened my mouth. I could have mentioned my small raise, the fact that I'd finally paid off my truck. But I already knew what would happen, the polite nod, the vacant stare. "Just steady work," I said instead. Robert nodded slowly, lips pressed tight. "Steady." Carter shot me a pitying glance that made me want to flip the table. The conversation moved on without me, as usual. Stocks, property, all the important things successful people discuss. I sat there, letting it roll over me. Until Robert leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine, and delivered the line that finally cracked something in me. "You know, Logan," he said, voice dripping with that practiced disappointment, "you're just jealous of your younger brother. He is successful, and you're just a factory worker." The words landed like a slap. For a moment, the table went silent. Even Elaine looked uncomfortable. And then something unexpected happened. I laughed. Not a polite chuckle or a forced smile, an honest, startled bark of laughter that felt like exhaling a decade's worth of resentment. Robert's eyebrows shot up. "You think this is funny?" I met his stare and realized, to my own surprise, that I did. It was hilarious. How predictable this was, how he thought he could still make me feel small. I stood up, the chair scraping back across the polished floor. "You know what? I'm good. Sit down," he snapped. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I've had enough." And without another word I walked out. No apologies. No explanations. Just gone. My phone started buzzing before I'd even pulled out of their neighborhood. I ignored it. For the first time in years, I felt something close to lightness. It wasn't happiness exactly, but it was a relief so sharp it left me almost giddy. Like I'd finally set down a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. Back in my apartment, I tossed my keys onto the counter and kicked off my boots. The place looked the same as always: old carpet, second-hand couch, the faint smell of last night's pizza, but it felt different. Because for once, I hadn't stayed quiet. I hadn't played along. I showered, microwaved leftovers, and went to bed with my phone on silent, determined not to think about any of them. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the blinds, and for a blissful 10 seconds, I forgot everything that had happened. Then I picked up my phone. 154 missed calls. It looked like a mistake. Some glitch. No one calls anyone 154 times unless something's on fire. Or someone is. My stomach tightened. I opened my voicemail, bracing myself. Robert's voice, tight and clipped. "Call me back. Now." Elaine's wavering. "Logan, please, it's important. We need to talk." Carter's, the most surreal of all. I know you probably don't care, but I need your help. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to each message pile up into something I couldn't ignore. Carter's voice cracked in one of them. It's all falling apart. Just call me. I remembered the way he'd smirked over his wine glass 12 hours earlier, so sure the universe was designed to keep him comfortable. And now? I couldn't help it. I laughed. It wasn't kind. It wasn't even satisfying. Just a flat, incredulous sound. I pulled up the family group chat. Dozens of messages, most of them frantic. Carter, please answer. I'm serious. Elaine, we need you here. Robert, stop being childish and pick up the phone. It was almost funny how fast the narrative flipped. Last night, I was the failure they could scold. Today, I was apparently their only lifeline. My curiosity got the better of me. I scrolled to the oldest message. Robert, call me back immediately. Carter has lost his job. There are issues with the house. Issues. Sure. That was Robert's speak for catastrophe. I closed my eyes and rubbed a hand over my face. Some small, spiteful part of me wanted to ignore them forever. To let them stew in the mess they'd made. But another part, some tired, stubborn corner of me, needed to see it for myself. I stood, pulled on clean jeans, and grabbed my keys. If everything really was collapsing, I wanted to watch the tower fall. The driveway looked the same as always, clean, orderly, a little too proud of itself. But the second I stepped out of my truck, I noticed the sign by the mailbox. Foreclosure notice. I stood there, keys in hand, letting the words sink in. Carter's prize Range Rover was parked crooked across the lawn, as if he'd skidded in too fast to care. That alone told me everything I needed to know. I walked up the steps, each one feeling like I was approaching a theater stage right before the final act. The door was cracked open. Inside, the house was chaos. Elaine was sitting on the couch, her hair a mess, clutching a tissue like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to reality. Robert was pacing back and forth, muttering under his breath. Carter was slumped at the dining table, head in his hands. For once, he didn't look like the golden boy. He looked like a man who'd finally run out of excuses. I didn't bother clearing my throat. You called? Robert spun around, his eyes red. Logan, sit down. I'll stand. Elaine looked up, voice trembling. It's not what you think. I let out a short laugh. Really? Because it looks exactly like what I think. Carter lifted his head. His eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. It's bad, he said, voice raw. Worse than I told them. Elaine made a strangled noise, but he kept going. The company's gone. They're calling it fraud. I don't know if I'll face charges. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Robert stopped pacing, his jaw tight. We've fallen behind on the mortgage, he admitted. More than behind. How far? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. 6 months, he said. His voice cracked on the last word. If we don't pay $5,000 by the end of the week, the bank takes the house. The same house they'd spent years bragging about. The house they'd never once imagined they'd lose. Elaine dabbed at her eyes. Logan, I know you're angry, but we need your help. It was almost impressive, how quickly they'd pivoted from disdain to desperation. I looked at Carter, who couldn't meet my gaze. You remember last night? I asked quietly. When you said I was just jealous? His shoulders hunched. I didn't mean. No. I cut in, voice steady. You did. You all did. Robert bristled. This isn't the time for lectures. Funny, I said, folding my arms. That's exactly what I was thinking last night. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air felt heavy with everything we'd never said. Carter swallowed. I know you have savings, he said finally, not quite looking at me. If you could just cover this payment, we'll figure out the rest. Elaine chimed in, her voice pleading. Please, Logan. We're asking for your help. I felt anger, pity, and a weary sort of vindication all tangled up in my chest. I'd waited my entire life for them to look at me and see something other than a disappointment. Apparently, all it took was losing everything. I exhaled, shook my head once, and turned toward the door. "Where are you going?" Robert demanded. "To think," I said. "And to enjoy the irony." And I walked out, leaving them in their perfect house, with their perfect illusions collapsing around them. The diner was nearly empty, just the way I liked it. A few old men sat nursing coffee refills, the radio mumbling some country song about regret. I slid into my usual booth by the window, the cracked vinyl sighing under my weight. The waitress, Debbie, who'd been there since I was a teenager, gave me a sympathetic smile as she poured my coffee. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "Close," I muttered. "Just my family." She nodded like that explained everything and left me alone. I'd been staring into my mug for maybe 20 minutes when the bell over the door jingled. Carter. He looked worse than he had in the kitchen, his hair a mess, dark circles smudged under his eyes. He spotted me and hesitated, as if deciding whether to turn around and leave. I didn't say anything. Just raised my eyebrows and waited. He walked over and slid into the seat across from me. For a moment neither of us spoke. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I guess you heard everything." "Hard not to," I said. "Between the 154 calls and the foreclosure sign, it was pretty clear." His mouth twitched, like he wanted to pretend this was funny. But he couldn't summon the energy. "I know you don't owe me anything," he said, voice hoarse. "Or them." "That's true," I agreed. He winced. "I'm not here to beg," he said quickly. I need you to understand. I never wanted any of this to happen." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "You didn't want it, but you sure liked it while it lasted." His gaze dropped to the table. "Yeah," he whispered. "I did." He picked at a tear in the menu, shoulders slumping. "Everything I told you, that I was up for director, that I had it all handled, it was all bullshit. I was drowning. I kept hoping something would come through, some deal or loan that would save me." "And when it didn't?" I asked. "I lied harder," he said simply. There was no self-pity in his tone, just exhausted resignation. "I used to think you were pathetic," he went on, voice low. "Working at the factory, living in that little apartment." He swallowed. "But at least you knew who you were. At least you weren't faking it." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to stand up and walk out. Another part, a smaller, quieter part, felt something like pity. "You spent so long trying to be better than me," I said finally. "And now?" He lifted his eyes, hollow and tired. "Now I'm just hoping you don't hate me." I didn't answer. Because in that moment, I honestly wasn't sure how I felt. The waitress came by, refilled my coffee, and gave Carter a curious look. He didn't order anything. Just sat there, staring at his hands. After a long silence, he looked up. "I'm sorry," he said, voice cracking. "For all of it." I took a slow sip of coffee. "Good," I said. "I'm glad you finally said it." Then I slid out of the booth and left him sitting there, alone with his regrets. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Carter's hollow voice in the diner and my father's sneer across the dinner table. A year ago, even a month ago, I would have done anything to feel needed by them. But now, all I felt was a cautious, unfamiliar power. They needed me. And if I was going to step into their mess, it would be on my terms. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. I drove back to the house with a calm that felt almost surreal. The foreclosure notice was still pinned to the door like a scarlet letter. Robert opened the door before I knocked. He looked terrible, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, the proud lines of his face sagging under the weight of his own arrogance. Elaine hovered behind him, hands twisting in her sweater. Carter sat on the couch, staring blankly at the floor. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. The silence was so thick it felt like you could slice it into pieces. Robert cleared his throat. "Logan." "Sit down," I said. He blinked. "Excuse me?" I pointed at the couch. "I said sit down." Elaine moved first, perching nervously on the armrest. Robert stayed standing another moment, clearly debating whether to argue, but finally he lowered himself beside Carter. I remained standing. "I've thought about this," I began, voice steady. "And I'll help. But there are conditions." Elaine's eyes flickered with hope. "Anything." I held up a hand. "Don't say anything unless you mean it." Robert bristled. "We're not children." "No," I agreed. "But you've acted like it." He opened his mouth to argue, but I didn't give him the chance. "You're 6 months behind on payments. You have no plan. No savings. Carter is about to be indicted or at least investigated, and you still expect someone else to fix it." Carter flinched. "I have enough saved to cover the immediate payment and give you breathing room," I continued. "But if I do, I'm moving in here. This house will be under my name until it's stable." Elaine's mouth fell open. "You want to move back?" "Yes," I said. "And if I'm paying for it, I'm in charge of how things run." Robert's face darkened. "You think you can just take over my house?" I met his stare. "I don't think it. I know it. Because without me, it won't be your house much longer." Carter didn't look up. Elaine's voice wavered. "Logan, please. This is the only way I'm willing to help," I said, cutting her off gently. I could feel my heart hammering, but my voice stayed calm. "No more secrets. No more pretending everything's fine. And no more treating me like I'm lesser." Robert looked like he was about to explode. "You'd rather lose the house than let me help on my terms?" I asked softly. His jaw clenched. Then, slowly, he shook his head. "No," he ground out. "We can't lose it." I nodded once. "Then that's the deal." Elaine reached for my hand, her eyes wet. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't answer. Because this wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't family unity. It was a contract. And for the first time in my life, I was setting the terms. 2 days later, I found myself walking into the local branch of Pinnacle Savings and Loan, the same bank where my parents had once bragged about their investment portfolio. Now, the only investment left was my savings, and the gamble I was about to make. The lobby smelled like stale coffee and desperation. I stepped up to the counter, work boots squeaking on the tile, and told the teller I needed to speak with the mortgage officer. She looked me over, taking in my faded jeans and the calluses on my hands. For a second, I wondered if she'd ask if I was lost. But she just nodded and gestured me toward a little glass-walled office. Mr. Kendrick, the loan officer, looked exactly how you'd expect, gray suit, polite smile, eyes that had seen every kind of financial disaster. He shook my hand and motioned for me to sit. "I understand you're here about the Forrester property," he began, folding his hands over a thick file. "That's right," I said. He flipped the folder open. "I won't sugarcoat this. The account is delinquent 6 months. If the arrears aren't paid by Friday, foreclosure will proceed." I nodded. "What will it take to stop it?" He glanced at his screen. $5,000 to bring it current. And from there, payments need to resume without interruption. I felt my throat tighten. That was nearly everything I'd saved. Years of extra shifts and skipped vacations, gone in a single transaction. Mr. Kendrick looked up, expression softening just enough to make me wonder if he pitied me. "Are you sure you want to do this?" "No. But I also knew I wouldn't be able to walk away if there was still a chance to fix it." "I'm sure," I said. He nodded once. "I'll prepare the paperwork." While he typed, I let my gaze drift around the office. A framed photo of his family on a fishing boat. A little brass plaque with a motivational quote about perseverance. I wondered what he'd think if he knew how many times I'd been told I was the failure in my family, only to be the one sitting here now, cleaning up the mess. 30 minutes later, I signed my name on a stack of forms. Each signature felt heavier than the last, like I was signing away the last illusions I'd held about what family meant. When it was done, Mr. Kendrick slid a receipt across the desk. "You've bought them time," he said. "I hope they appreciate it." I stood, tucking the paper into my wallet. "I'm not doing it for appreciation." He looked at me, surprised. "Then why?" I thought about Robert's hollow eyes, Elaine's trembling voice, Carter's exhausted confession. Because someone has to, I said simply. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the first hints of winter. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and took a long breath. This wasn't victory. But it was control. The day I moved back in, the sky was the color of wet concrete. It felt appropriate somehow, like even the weather knew this wasn't a celebration. Elaine hovered at the front door as I carried my boxes up the steps. She kept offering to help, her hands fluttering around like nervous birds, but I waved her off. I didn't need help carrying my life inside. I'd done it alone this far. My old bedroom looked almost exactly the same as it had when I was 17. Same faded blue walls, same scuffed dresser, same closet door that never quite closed. The only thing missing was the old resentment that used to choke me every time I walked in. I set down the last box and stood there, letting the quiet settle around me. This wasn't defeat. This was me choosing to be here, on my terms. Downstairs, I could hear Robert's voice, low and tense, arguing with Carter about something. I didn't bother listening. I unpacked slowly, folding my shirts into neat stacks, lining up my boots against the wall. Every small act felt like staking a claim. By the time I walked back into the kitchen, Carter was sitting at the table, staring at nothing. Robert was pacing, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. "Sit down," I said. Carter obeyed instantly. Robert hesitated. His eyes flicked to Elaine, as if she might step in to shield him from this moment. She didn't. I set a manila folder on the table. "This is the payment schedule. This is the budget going forward. You'll both sign it." Robert bristled. "We don't need a contract. We're family." I laughed. It wasn't warm. "That's exactly why we need it." His mouth opened, but no words came out. "I'm not doing this halfway," I continued. "You want my help? You follow my rules." Carter rubbed a hand over his face. "And if we don't? Then you can explain to the bank why you're homeless," I said calmly. Elaine made a soft, wounded noise. But she didn't argue. Robert finally sank into a chair, his shoulders slumping like someone had cut his strings. "You think you're in charge now," he muttered. "I don't think it," I said. "I know it." Carter lifted his eyes. For once, there was no mockery in them, just tired acceptance. "What do you want us to do?" he asked. "You," I said, pointing at him. "Start working with me at the factory. Full time. No excuses." He looked like he might protest, then thought better of it. He nodded once. "And you," I turned to Robert, "will respect that this is my house as much as yours now." His jaw worked, but he said nothing. Elaine's eyes filled with tears. "Logan, thank you." I didn't answer. Because gratitude wasn't the point. This was survival. This was the price of finally being seen. And I wasn't about to let any of them forget it. If I'd thought moving back in would make things simpler, I was wrong. Every morning started early. The alarm went off at 5, and I knocked on Carter's door until he stumbled out, bleary-eyed and resentful. He didn't complain much, not out loud, but I could see it in his face every time he pulled on the steel-toe boots he never imagined himself wearing. At first, the other guys at the factory treated him like a novelty. "White-collar prince," they called him, half mocking, half curious to see if he'd last. To his credit, Carter didn't quit. He showed up every day, even when the work was brutal and the paychecks humbling. I watched him change, bit by bit. The arrogance in his posture melted into something more honest, something almost like humility. Meanwhile, I kept my focus tight. My promotion to supervisor came quietly, no fanfare, just a nod from my boss and a new set of keys. Some nights, I'd come home too exhausted to speak. But it was a clean kind of tired, nothing like the old ache of trying to prove my worth to people who'd already decided I had none. Elaine started cooking again, simple meals that tasted better than any of the pretentious recipes she used to show off. Sometimes she'd leave a plate covered in foil on the counter with a note, "For when you get home." It felt strange, that small kindness. Like she was trying to say something she didn't have the words for. Robert mostly kept to himself. He'd sit in the living room with the TV on low, pretending not to watch me when I came in. One night, I caught him standing at the window as I parked my truck. For a moment, our eyes met through the glass. He didn't look angry. Just tired. And maybe a little ashamed. Carter and I rarely talked about the past. But some evenings, over microwaved leftovers, he'd break the silence. "You know," he said once, voice rough, "I used to think I had it all figured out." I didn't bother agreeing. We both knew it wouldn't have been true. Another time, he looked up from his plate and said, "I don't know if I ever thanked you." "You didn't," I said. He nodded, eyes dropping. "I'm trying." That was enough. It wasn't an apology. But it was a start. Weeks turned into months. The house stopped feeling like a battlefield and started to feel like something almost normal. Not healed. Not perfect. But functional. And for the first time, I realized that was enough. It was a Tuesday night, the kind that used to blur into all the others. The air smelled like rain, and the kitchen was warm from the oven. Elaine had made roast chicken, simple, nothing fancy, and set 3 places without comment. Carter washed his hands at the sink, sleeves rolled up, face smudged with dirt from the factory. I sat down and tried to pretend it was just another meal. But the tension was different. Tighter. Like everyone had something they needed to say, but no one knew how to start. Halfway through the meal, Robert cleared his throat. The sound made Carter's head snap up, eyes wary. Robert didn't look at him. He was staring straight at me. "I've been thinking," he began, voice rough. "About everything." I didn't answer. Just waited. He shifted in his chair, the movement awkward. "I know. I haven't always been fair to you." Carter looked down at his plate. Elaine set her fork down gently, her eyes wet. Robert took a slow breath. "I thought success meant a certain kind of job. A certain kind of life. And when you didn't follow that path, He stopped, jaw working, like the words were stuck in his throat. "I treated you like you were less," he said finally. "And that was wrong." The room felt too quiet. I swallowed. "Yeah," I said. "It was." He nodded once, as if bracing himself for impact. "I'm sorry, Logan." It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't even everything I wanted to hear. But it was more than I'd ever expected. Elaine reached over and covered my hand with hers. "We were wrong," she whispered. "We let our pride hurt you." Carter's voice was hoarse when he spoke. "I spent so long trying to look successful. And you were the one actually holding it all together." I looked at him, seeing not the brother who used to gloat across the dinner table, but the man who'd shown up every day since the collapse and done the work. "Thank you," he said, voice low, "for not walking away." A long silence stretched across the table. I didn't rush to fill it. Because this was the moment I'd been waiting for, not a flashy gesture, not a sudden transformation. Just acknowledgement. And it was enough. I took a sip of water, the tightness in my chest easing by degrees. "I'm not doing this for gratitude," I said. "I'm doing it because someone had to." Robert nodded again, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "I know." For the rest of the meal, no one said much. But for once, it wasn't because we were pretending nothing was wrong. It was because, for the first time, we'd said everything that needed to be said. The next evening, I found Carter out on the porch. He was sitting in the old wicker chair, elbows on his knees, staring out at the dark yard like it might offer up some answers. I stepped outside and leaned against the railing. The air smelled like wet leaves and the last hint of summer. He didn't look up when he spoke. "Feels different now." I nodded. "Yeah. I used to think this house meant we'd made it," he said quietly. "Like as long as we had it, everything was fine. It's just wood and drywall," I said. "It never made us better." He finally turned to look at me. In the porch light, he looked tired but lighter somehow. Like losing everything had taken some of the weight off his shoulders. "Do you ever wish you'd just let it go?" he asked. "Let it all fall apart." I thought about that. About how simple it would have been to drive away and never look back. To let the bank take the house and let them deal with the fallout. Sometimes, I admitted. But then I think about how long I spent wishing I mattered. And I guess I didn't want to spend the rest of my life wondering if I'd done the right thing. He nodded slowly, rubbing a hand over the back of his neck. You did the right thing. Maybe, I said. Time will tell. We sat there for a while, not talking. The quiet wasn't heavy like it used to be. It was just quiet. Eventually, Carter spoke again, voice low. I'm going to stick with the factory job. Even if the charges go away. Feels good to do something real. I felt something twist in my chest. Pride, maybe? Or relief? Good, I said. You should. He looked down at his hands. You know, I used to be terrified of ending up like you. I barked a laugh. Yeah. I remember. But now? He lifted his gaze. I think you were always the only one of us who knew who he was. The porch light buzzed overhead. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Because that was it, really. The acknowledgement I'd stopped believing would ever come. And it felt enough. He stood up and walked back inside, leaving me alone with the night. I sat down in the chair he'd vacated, listening to the crickets and the distant hum of traffic. The house behind me wasn't perfect. The people in it weren't perfect. And I'd stopped expecting them to be. I didn't know what the future looked like. Maybe we'd figure it out. Maybe we'd screw it up again. But I knew this. I wasn't the failure anymore. I wasn't the cautionary tale. I was just Logan. And for the first time in my life, that was all I needed to be.